So, with the open beta of The Division now coming up very soon, let's talk about my experience with the game so far. I had, up until the closed beta, been pretty skeptical about the game and not dedicated a lot of time into researching it. I've been aware of it and I kept it on my radar, but with the way people were speaking about it with a ton of massive hype, it reminded me of things like Evolve and other games that had a ton of hype around them. And so I kept it at arm's length. But from what I've seen, it looked very much like Ghost Recon, and I didn't really get what all the fuss was about with a kind of third-person shooter. I've never been greatly engrossed in third-person games, and this was, similarly like that. I was kind of, what's the deal, really? Getting into the beta, though, was a very important experience, and I think it highlights why public betas for games are so important in a time of pre-ordering on a massive scale. I found The Division to be a more immersive and, importantly, addictive experience than I had anticipated. It had me wanting to come back to it the same day or evening to play more, and that's a good sign. With quite a few games in 2015, I found myself starting a game and then quickly becoming a bit tired of the mechanics or just not really interested in what was happening to my character. I found quite the opposite with The Division, and that to me is a good sign. The missions and general purposes of your objective made sense and felt pretty immersive in the context of your situation, a city, a post-pandemic. I spent most of my time alone to begin with, completing missions and generally getting to grips with the game, and this was very manageable, but then teaming up with friends later in the evening brought home just how enjoyable and natural the tactical teamwork can be. In my playthrough of The Last of Us, I highlighted how important UI was in making that game a truly enjoyable experience. It was fluid, it didn't force you to break the immersion, and was simple enough that you could complete tasks quickly and when you're under pressure. It was important when you're in those critical situations to have that. The Division also has excellent UI. Its menus I tested extensively, the processes of equipping, comparing, modding, and generally managing your inventory, and they made this very user-friendly. The comparison system of checking stats against other items works particularly well, and when you have an MMO style game where you are continually upgrading and changing out pieces of gear, at least in the early stages, that's very important. If they didn't have this, it'd be a massive pain to constantly check items against one another and go through different menus to equip items, as you might have found with some games years ago. Still, one gripe about the UI, and let's just talk about this. Yes, okay, looking at the footage that was showcased at E3, they did have a completely different system to access the UI through your wrist device, and the map also was spread out around you a bit more. This has been commented on endlessly. I do agree it would have been nice to keep that, and the wrist device especially would have helped to not break the immersion so much from the game. Things like this change through development though, and for whatever reason the team decided to change it. I don't think it's an especially big deal, it's certainly not game breaking, and I don't think it missells the game either. If they'd released the game without showing any of those changes publicly, then yes, I suppose there would have been an argument there for not delivering what was promised. But as it stands, it's just a standard development and things change. So the standard missions were all pretty easy in the beta, much as you would find in any starting area, but I would imagine that as you progress through that PvE side of the game, you'll find that these will become naturally increasingly challenging. The question in my mind though is whether these will be completely possible solo or co-op will be actually required in order to complete them. The missions I played solo and with friends didn't seem to greatly alter, so that's a question I look forward to finding out the answer to, whether or not you're going to, need to recruit people to play with, or whether you can just solo through and have a single player experience. The way in which the game plays though, I could imagine myself being very happy just playing this purely as a single player. Having the co-op multiplayer aspect makes it even better, but sometimes people don't always have that option. One gripe some people have iterated though was the lack of buildings that could be entered. This is always a question when it comes to games of just how literal do you make that environment. The buildings that were available to enter had excellent detail and felt really true to the environment. At the same time, I do understand why they can't make every or even the majority of buildings enterable, because come on, just imagine how long that would take to design and build together on the scale that the map is. But also, what would be the point? Other than gathering food, and I suppose you do, that feeling of freedom, I don't really see why most buildings would really be of any particular interest in the context of what we're doing. Having only a few buildings enterable does mean that it helps also focus your searching, and so, you know, they could have made more, but I don't really see how it would have helped or really expanded on much for, you know, other than I say that freedom for the use of the player and feeling like you could go over, not feeling constrained, not feeling tied down or restricted. Next, Dark Zone and gunplay. Now, the Dark Zone represents the abandoned sectors of the map, which were all but a lost cause during this outbreak. Now, the lawless zones where people scavenge for high-level and rare items, it's not really explained why it contains such an abundance of epic weapons compared to anywhere else in the city, but anyway, let's just skim over that. Once you've tracked down some high-level AI and dealt with them, you may find some rarer items dropping. In order to use these, though, they first have to be decontaminated. This means they have to be extracted from the Dark Zone by helicopter. So this will be the primary area for collecting rarer items. You'll also be able to craft things too, but in most RPG MMO games, crafting usually requires a massive effort to collect stuff to build them and actually reach the higher quality gear that's actually worth owning. So it'll be interesting to see how they balance that in The Division. So far though, the Dark Zone seems pretty straightforward. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out in the wider game, because unlike most RPG MMOs, the whole mechanic of securing gear and returning it is pretty different. The PvP aspect is a threat, but it's curious to see how griefing, or how much griefing there will be, or if it will be a fairly respectful affair. We just don't know yet. During my time in the closed beta, we did have some guys who are acting like complete bastards, and also some perfect gentlemen. So when the community is larger at release, anybody's guess about how that's going to be. The shooting and gunplay in the game worked out pretty much as I expected for a third-person shooter. The modding and attachment of weapons, good feature, tons of detail there. The damage and time to kill is something people have criticised or just been unable to cope with the concept of the game, basically not being DayZ in the city. But basically, if you can't handle the fact that it's an RPG game, well, bad luck. I don't have a great deal to say about the gunplay itself other than it was smooth, felt good within the flow of the movement that you had, and was easy to get your head around. When working as a squad, it was tactical and enjoyable, so it fulfilled pretty much everything that I thought it would be there. My experience with the closed beta was certainly enough to grab my attention. As I said, I was very skeptical of the game before playing it. I really didn't think a third-person RPG-style shooter would, for want of a better word, make me care about it. But I did care about it. I was invested in leveling up my gear, improving my character, exploring the city area, and working to bring things back together. Hopefully, in the full release, this will be fleshed out enough for you to be really engrossed. I guess my only fear, and it's a bit of a personal fear actually, comes from being an old-school World of Warcraft player. I have deliberately avoided MMOs since WoW, because that game was crystal meth in game form, and I was addicted to it. Properly addicted. The problem for me with MMO games is that the background quests usually just support the loot upgrade process. You just get a new piece of item which allows you to do a new quest, which gets you a new item, which lets you do a new quest, and on and on. In World of Warcraft, my guild had the glory of getting several server-first boss kills. That's when you kill a boss before any of the other guilds on the server. We also were top PvPers in the league there. So my concern with The Division is that I want a game that is not just about loot upgrading. I can't get into that cycle of loot addiction again. I just can't do it. Always one more upgrade, one more. So I need a strong narrative. I need a cause to play the game, not just a mechanic. That's my biggest question about the game, and until release, I can't see how I'm going to find that answer. The Division Open Beta is coming up really soon. It's starting February 18th for Xbox One. PC and PS4 players will get it on February 19th, and it's going to run until February 21st. You can start preloading it on February 16th. You're also going to have access to some new content there. Apparently it's not going to be just the same as the closed beta. You're going to have access to the subway this time and a new faction called the Cleaners. So it's going to be interesting to see. You'll also be able to unlock some new stuff back at your base in terms of the departments there. And so there's going to be new things to do, which is good because I think a lot of people were worried that it was just going to be rinse and repeat the same. But, you know, ultimately, how is the Division going to play out? Has it done enough to convince you? Well, I think perhaps this open beta is really going to be the key to that, for many people to go back for a second time and have another look at it and think, okay, is this, you know, am I on board with this at this point? Thanks for watching today, guys. Hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, drop it a little like. Tell me your thoughts about the Division down in the comments below. See you next time.